All right. Well, yeah, thank you all for coming. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedules and um, feel like this is a pretty important issue that I'm very passionate about. So tonight I'm going to share what I can. You can check out my website, hawaiiediblelandscaping.com, where I have information about working with nature is the way I describe it. Uh, I offer landscaping, gardening, farming, agroforestry, and permaculture consultation, design, installation, maintenance, and education like we'll be doing tonight. Before I jump in too far, I just want to say thanks to USDA and UH and the Marine and Environmental Research Institute of Pohnpei for helping to make this happen, and also HFUU as well. It's nice to be collaborating with you all. And I also just want to acknowledge what I'm talking about tonight is it's really like it's ancient knowledge. This is an ancient practice that goes back a long time. And so what I'm sharing wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the many generations before. And also, our connection to the source where this all comes from. So with that said, tonight I'll be talking about what agroforestry is, the overview, a basic overview of the practices, why it's important, and foundational origins. Hold on one second. Let me just change my screen here. There we go. Okay, another thing. There we are. All right. So yeah, agroforestry. Seems like there's increasing interest, and it's basically the integration of agriculture and forestry species, so plants and animals, and practices for ecosystem goods and services. There's a wide variety of those goods and services, and we'll get into that a bit more in a bit. As far as we know, the oldest agroforestry systems were developed in Java about 9,000 years ago. And they were home gardens, which were incredibly diverse, highly productive, growing a polyculture, so a multitude of types of plants that offered a wide diversity of food and nutrition. Many of the plants had many uses, such as the coconut we see here in this photograph here. Coconuts are the tree of 1,000 uses. Very resilient and reliable, sustainable, and equitable. So societies that historically have been horticulturalists or agroforesters tend to have a better quality of life. And also the nice thing is the land and the water also do better off as well. It's believed these systems developed in response to decreasing resources and increasing populations, which when you think about it, it's what we have nowadays, right? More than ever before. We have decreasing resources and an increasing population. So I believe agroforestry plays a role in helping us to overcome our challenges and create a better future. So if there's any farmers out there who are wondering, well, why should I do agroforestry? What is this thing? There's more diversity, more complexity. It's there's all kinds of challenges. And if you look at this field, when I look at it, it's brown, there's nothing living. And honestly, Western agriculture methods have been largely the driving force behind what is called the sixth mass extinction, where we live in a mass extinction right now. It's been going on for thousands and thousands of years, but especially the last 200 years. And Western agricultural practices in quite a few locations seriously degrade and even desertify the land. So if we want to have a future, we need to work with nature, because after all, the forest is what provides their fertility and the organic matter, and also the practices that we can use to really work with nature. We also have higher input costs, especially here in Hawaii, higher labor costs, and the food, the consumers are really paying the price. You know, there's a lot of hunger all throughout Hawaii, especially in the rural locations and all over the world. And agroforestry actually offers a way to increase production while also taking care of the needs of the land. Okay. So the reason why we do agroforestry is for the ecosystem services. It's basically what nature does. You know, it's how nature improves the land. It's how land is made fertile on its own. You know, like if you think about a forest, you look at a clearing and turns into a forest. Nobody planted it, nobody fertilized it, nobody tended it, and it naturally turns into a forest. As a result, we get these amazing benefits of protecting the water, soil improvement. For farmers with agroforestry, you look at this photograph and you see the mulch. Yeah, we have a lot of, oh, we got a bird. Yeah, just one sec. There we go. I had a little bit of nature come in here. So yeah, with the mulch and the greater diversity, you know, different levels of vegetation like lower understory plants and overstory plants, we reduce our evaporation, which makes a huge difference during drought. The soil is biotilled, is what I call it, where it breaks up the compaction. We have less leaching of nutrients into the aquifers and the water, less erosion and runoff, and less weeds. That's my favorite part. And I think many farmers really can benefit from this. That's one of the biggest challenges we face in Hawaii. And yeah, the beneficial side just goes on and on. And it really, I think you'll see tonight, there's just so many great things about this that as you get involved with this and get more experience, I think you'll be excited about it too. So those ecosystems, even though those services sounds like those are the benefits, those are just the services, and then they create the benefits, and food is one of those benefits, right? And here in Hawaii, and really all over the world, people have expressed that the main benefit for them is the perpetuation of their native and cultural plants, practices, and a sense of place. And ultimately, if you embrace agroforestry from that regard, everything below that you see on this list follows. So it's not like they're doing this or that, like very piecemeal approach. It's more of a holistic approach and mindset. And then there's a lot of benefits that come. But reforestation, protecting the land and water, building our soil, improving the wildlife habitat. There's so much deforestation that's happened. Diversifying our crops and income, increasing our production. So I put this lower on the list because the production follows the ecosystem services. So it's like a byproduct basically of what we're doing. We reduce our costs if we're doing it right. It could be also very expensive, big problems if we, you know, go big right away and don't have experience. And this picture here is a radish, a daikon radish that I use for biotilling. It dramatically improves the soil, can break up the soil up to 3 feet deep when planted with other plants. And then on the right, we have kalo or taro with papaya and vetiver, as well as ground cover below. And that system, that's in my zone 4 permaculture garden at this place that I tend and planted. And it's barely any work. You know, I show up to harvest, do some chop and drop. So yeah, we can have production and low maintenance at the same time. Another aspect of agroforestry that can be very useful is working in challenging locations. As many of you know, here in Hawaii, there's everywhere is different. You know, we've got rock, we've got lava, we've got ash-based soils, we've got very acidic soils, we've got highlands, lowlands, coastal. There's a wide multitude of places where agriculture doesn't grow, doesn't succeed. And agroforestry and also permaculture, which is embraces agroforestry and a variety of other agroecological practices. It basically can help us to revitalize this earth one garden at a time. This picture is from a former rock quarry, rubbish dump, and railroad grade. So yeah, it was a pretty tough site where I had to use a jackhammer at times to make holes for planting. And I was able to create an edible botanical garden with nearly 200 species of plants. Ground covers, that's perennial peanut that you see, a nitrogen fixing ground cover. The rock wall is now covered with edible and medicinal plants. And I like to say I'm replanting Eden. You know, imagine a world where we just have absolute abundance all around us and it's not a lot of work, right? That's the thing that most of us, a lot of people don't like to do it. And it's also, to me, a lot of the work we do in agriculture is harmful as we try to stop a crop from failing, like weeding and fertilizing. I believe nature is the one that can do that for us. One other benefit is that we can increase our agrobiodiversity. There's so many plants that have been introduced, for better or worse, here in Hawaii. A fraction of them are invasive. So I highly encourage people to avoid invasive plants. We don't want to be spreading those and disturbing native ecosystems. But many of them, like peaches, you know, like peaches grow in the highlands. I just visited a client the other day up in Hamakua, higher elevation. And they had peaches that were like, you know, pretty good sized peaches, sweet and productive, while the koa that was there, it's sick. It has the koa wilt and rust. And so we're at this threshold now where we need to, I believe, and how can I put it? Work with the native plants, get them as established as possible, but also grow food with them because we're living in a greater range than historically. And when we increase our agrobiodiversity, we can increase our health, eat delicious foods, fresh food year round, and do this all while enhancing the landscape. A common agroforestry practice that you actually would see quite often here in Hawaii is the windbreak. Historically, there was a windbreak that went around the islands where it'd be like hala and coconut, maybe milo and ko, where it would be a forest, a useful forest that shielded the island from the wind. Pretty essential when you live out in the middle of an ocean. You can have hurricanes come in, which, you know, with those strong winds, they're going to want to blow the trees over, blow the flowers off your trees, shred your taro leaves. So having a windbreak offers a multitude of benefits. Key here in this traditional windbreak from Yap is site adapted. It's salt-laden soils. It's right above brackish water. So coconuts can handle considerable salty water, as can this ape that they grew. Ape is a distant relative of taro. And you see how you have, excuse me, a wider canopy so that there's light that can get to the understory. So you can have both levels. And then the cool thing is you can actually have higher production overall with time-tested intercropping and polyculture systems. One other aspect we have here is we have a lot of pests, right? With all these things that were introduced to Hawaii, unfortunately, people introduce a lot of pests and diseases. So windbreaks, such as a podocarpus windbreak, make excellent pest barriers because they can't see, and it also blocks the smell of the food plants that we're cultivating. Western agroforestry practices have been less about diversity and more about simplicity. So often, if you do your homework, check out some of the resources that I share in the document that will be available online about like how to do agroforestry. But basically, much of the work has been done with like one tree and one species. It makes it easier to maintain, especially with the machine. Reduces the complexity. So, you know, you don't have a ton of crops. You know, if you had like 10 things, it's like, you know, mastering each plant and marketing and processing, it gets to be overwhelming versus doing one or two things really well. This is common and scalable in like Iowa and the plains and whatnot, where they have a lot of land that just runs and runs and runs. It's pretty much the same for a long time. So this does a lot of benefits, offers a lot of benefits. You know, windbreaks in particular, the Western style, they helped end the Dust Bowl. And now agroforestry practices are ensuring it doesn't come back and also increasing production. You know, these trees can be wood later on that turns into timber. Another common agroforestry practice is silvopasture. Silvo meaning forest. And little side note, the term savage, basically the etymology of it, if you look at the origins of what it means person of the forest. And I'm originally from New Jersey and I grew up in the forest over there. So in a way I'm a savage, a white savage. But you know, when you have the trees and the pasture below with the widely spaced trees, the animals that live there do much better. They, you know, just like all of us, we don't want to be living outside in the elements getting blown around, right? Getting rained on. The cows and whatever animals you have there will actually offer a higher production of the whatever you're looking for, whether it's meat or eggs, milk. You can get more by taking care of nature. And that's one of the themes I want to really you know, stress with you all, is the importance of taking care of nature first, and then nature takes care of us. This farm has kaumani planted as part of the windbreak here. So it's a native / Hawaiian useful plant that, you know, it's like a little bit of restoration, but also food production as well. And yeah, I've worked a lot with Kanaka Kava. I'll have some more photos in there. They've been great supporters. I really appreciate them and all that they've done to, you know, help me and collaborate over the years. I don't even know what to call this because we basically got rid of the pasture in this chicken forage and fodder agroforest. That's like the technical term, but we have animals, but we basically got rid of the wainaku. If anybody has wainaku grass, it's a really troublesome plant because it has roots that run below the ground. And then if you have a tree, all those roots are going to then live in the base of the tree. And so if you pull, you know, the grass, they're going to come right back up. It creates a ton of work, especially if you plant a polyculture, a multi-species food forest. It's a nightmare. So we were able to succeed the wainaku by planting a chicken forage and fodder agroforest, where the chickens were actually pecking at the wainaku And then we had enough shade and mulch that we chopped and dropped, as well as other plantings, where the Wainaku is gone now. And instead of pasture, it's like it's a forest. And if you look at this photograph, you'll see like there's just all this organic matter. Coconuts that have been cut, and a wide diversity of plants that are based on helping chickens. This is also combined with a Korean natural farming deep litter system. It's a method that is usually used for confined animals, pigs or chickens, where the food is brought to them. But instead, at Kuleke Farm, they give the chickens the option to go out and forage, so they go and get food. And apparently a success that we had with that was that there's no chicken mites, or very few chicken mites, out in the food forest, versus when you go inside, like most chicken coops, chicken mites are a serious issue here in Hawaii. So they can go out and clean themselves off, and the pressure is a little bit less. An important agroforestry practice is called the riparian forest buffer. Riparian meaning waterways. Our agricultural practices are very harmful to the water. You know, think of the Mississippi River. The pollution and erosion that goes through there is creating a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, because of all the nutrients feeding algae, which then sucks up all the oxygen. Nothing survives anymore besides that one algae. So planting trees and nutrient demanding plants between your agricultural operations and the waterways is a way to protect the water, protect the resources for the future, but also provide additional crops like ulu, as we see here in this picture, native species habitat, pollinator habitat, windbreak. There's a whole multitude of functions that you can get with the riparian buffer. And the Ulu Agroforestry in Hawaii guide, I was involved with this with a group of folks who put this together. And in that's where these pictures are from. But you just check out the Ulu Co-op's website, and it's a free guide that gives you a basic overview of these practices, as well as direct information from individual farmers and examples of what they're doing. One of my favorite practices is called hedgerow alley cropping. A hedge being a line of plants, often woody, and that's one of the things with agroforestry, is it's like trees, right, and or shrubs and agricultural plants. But you could also use vetiver grass. For those of you who are familiar with that, vetiver grass can be an excellent hedge row. Plant them about 12 feet apart, the rows, and then you can grow vegetables right between them. If you add pigeon pea and perennial peanut, those will provide nitrogen. They're nitrogen fixing plants, as well as additional mulch. So when and I'm a huge fan of pigeon pea. Yeah, let me tell you, pigeon pea is the bomb. You can get it at some grocery stores. The Goya brand sells it in the dried bean section, pigeon pea or ganduli gandule bean. It's a short-lived shrub, tap-rooted, does an amazing job of biotilling. Very deep-rooted, makes lots of soil. So I just grow them about 12 feet apart, 2 feet apart when I sow the seed, and then I'll thin them to 4 feet, and then do occasional hedge trimming to make sure it doesn't get too big and flop over. As you can see, you can grow big kalo that way. The part shade encourages higher growth for some reason. If you grow like lower growing vegetables like lettuces and things, they're actually adapted to part shade. They don't want to be in the full sun with their nice succulent, tender leaves. They're going to wilt. They prefer to have some part sun, or part shade. So it's really about like learning which plants need what kind of relationship with all this stuff, as you'll see. If you're doing peppers, they need a little bit more sun. Okay, back to Kanaka Kava, which, by the way, they have a kava bar over in Kona, where they produce the kava on the farm and then serve it up at the bar. Pretty amazing to have fresh ava from the island and grown in agroforestry systems. Within forest farming, oftentimes what we have is an overstory tree or plant. But yeah, we have like, an overstory. We need some shade because the understories are usually shade loving plants. So ava is generally, or kava is generally more adapted to like the forests. That's where, where it's traditionally planted. But it can take full sun in certain conditions if it has a windbreak to protect it. Olena or turmeric is another example of an understory crop that's grown in a forest farming system, as is golden seal. If you've ever heard of golden seal or ginseng, those are also grown in forest farming systems. Mushrooms, that's another one. And the nice thing about this is you get the services of the constant soil creation. The leaves are just falling. There's nitrogen fixing trees here, just constantly fertilizing, and they can become stable, low maintenance systems after they're established. Okay, one of my favorite things to do is conservation farming, or conservation agroforestry, where I integrate food plants and support species like that pigeon pea, the daikon, the ground covers, plants that improve the conditions and make it so that plants are going to thrive. And then I have the conditions that are right for the native plants. So this is ko'oko'olau, the yellow flower there. It's the mountain variety or species, a little bit more uncommon than the other one that people might see. And also, there's a conservation and perpetuation of the ava. Very important that kalo, ava, and all these plants are cared for, and we keep them living, because kalo only lasts a year and then it's going to want to like die down. The ava, it kind of gets hit with pests. So they need us to take care of them, especially nowadays. So our gardens can become a nursery, which then we can plant out on a broader scale. I did papaya on both sides here. And then in a little bit, you'll see an earlier planting, it had, what was it, sun hemp and a whole cover crop mix. So it went through a whole succession, a natural succession, which I'll tell you a little bit about. Here's another example of conservation farming from Kulike Farm, and it illustrates the pulelehua, which is a Hawaiian butterfly that needs mamaki and koa to complete its life cycle. And nowadays, especially with the pigs all over the place, the native ecosystem up above is ravaged. We just have these monotypic so-called forests where the native plants are gone. And as a result, the insects and all the wildlife, all, everything, it's all struggling. And I believe when you look at the landscape, you can determine how a native culture is doing. If the landscape is struggling, so is that native culture, and vice versa. If the native culture is struggling, the landscape is struggling, because they're one and the same. So this is something that we can do to keep it living, to grow medicine, and also create habitat for native species. Syntropic farming is a cool, relatively new practice. It's a type of permaculture, which is, how would I put it? It's a mixture of sustainable living practices. So it goes beyond agriculture itself. They get into solar and home, like, building natural houses. But this practice is pretty cool, because what they do is that in Brazil, they started trying to farm on super degraded land that was abandoned, basically. And they were able to revitalize the land by planting trees. And for those of you who know eucalyptus, you'll kind of chuckle at this, but yeah, they planted eucalyptus because they grow so fast. And a number of other fast growing plants to then build the soil, revitalize the soil, and then get production. This planting illustrates the hedgerow alley cropping, or row cropping, or alley cropping, but you see there's multiple things going on. We have a polyculture. We have polycultures within polycultures, multiple plants working together. We have the greens below, each one filling a different niche, which helps to control the weeds. And then between the trees, there's tomatoes, and then also another type of tree called Gliricidia. They're all filling different niches in time and space. It's a really beautiful way to go. And I do something similar to that, but I add like a lot more cover crops and ground covers. It's more, I try to mimic nature a bit more while maintaining the access for easy maintenance and harvesting. Very important if you do this. You don't want to just plant everywhere and then have to go through and weed it all. And one last practice to give you the overview is, some people call it urban food forests. I like to call it edible landscaping, because, like when we live in a place for a while, especially if you garden, planting food is great. I think a lot of us are gung-ho about food, and some of us are like poo-poo the flowers and whatnot. But what I found is when you plant the flowers, and there's so much room, there's so much room between all these plants. We need to fill the space between our primary crops, because if we don't, the weeds are going to be out there and we'll be weed whacking and mowing every 2 weeks. So yeah, embrace the flowers, plant as many as you can, or lots of food, which in this picture there's figs, bananas, there's papayas, there was kalo, there's native plants, there's hapu'u, cultural plants. And it's also a living privacy barrier. So if you live on a small piece of land, this is half an acre, you can do all kinds of amazing things when you plant in an agroforest that's designed for high diversity, production, and low maintenance, which it takes a while to be able to get there. And there is maintenance. I want to be straight up. There is definitely work that when you're growing a regenerative system, your effort should shift from weeding, getting it established, 6 months, usually once a month I weed. It gets easier and easier if you keep on replanting, and it shifts to maintenance, like chop and drop, removing leaves, thinning out around your primary crops, giving them the love they need. And then once they become more mature, the maintenance drops off and you shift towards showing up to harvest. Go surf, go plant more. You don't have to be out there every day pulling weeds. Right. So there's definitely challenges with this. One of the biggest challenges we face is that most of the traditional agroforestry systems have been eliminated. In Washington, there's amazing aquaculture systems working with native plants that settlers who were ignorant drained and planted potatoes. And as it turns out, the native cattail was considerably more productive of starch than those potatoes. So it did a whole lot of work, destroyed the ecosystem, and messed up the waterways. Luckily, there's like the Ulu belt. We still have the Ulu here. And there's also people who are revitalizing this knowledge now, like Dr. Natalie Kurashima and Noah Lincoln and others. Since we don't have a lot of examples, there is a steep learning curve. You can't just, well, maybe you can, but it's difficult to know what you're doing right off the bat because nature is the most complex thing, right? It is. It's Earth. So I encourage people to start small, learn from their mistakes, and build on your successes so that you don't create huge problems, which then take a lot of work. I like to say big dreams cause big problems. Start small. Keep your diversity limited at first. Tree, shrub, ground cover, herbaceous perennial like root crops, and cover crop. Those are the ones I do. Also plant in reliable patterns on contour. So going across the hillside so that as you do your chop and drop, you're building a bioterrace that will hold the soil, build soil. Especially when it rains, that'll turn into a little dam, and all the water that runs across the ground, you wouldn't believe how much soil will move in one night. If you've had rain for 3 weeks and you get like a huge rainstorm, it's more or less like a lake on a mountainside where all the water is running across the ground. And I highly encourage that you go out during extreme weather if it's not too windy, and use caution in places where there's moving water, but you'll see what's going on. And if you can work with that system and you know it's coming, you can actually create traps where all the nutrients above are feeding your garden. And that's a real sustainable method. With perennial crops, which are often used in agroforests, we can have a buildup of pests just because they're there for years instead of a short-lived plant. Another factor to consider is it's important to limit the co-hosts that and also daikon, sun hemp, which will inhibit and even kill the nematodes. So you create these, beneficial plant communities. That's definitely my favorite way to go. Yeah, like I said, the management and also harvesting of these multiple crops is very challenging at first. So that's why we start small. And then in red, underlined, in bold, I can't express how important it is that the weed control in these systems is going to be the biggest problem. And over across the board, all around Hawaii, that's the biggest issue we have. Because I think, as many of you know, we have things like guinea grass or California grass, which can grow 25 feet tall, Napier grass, Maile Pilau, all kinds of things that will grow if you just lay it on the ground. And so that's why with these systems, we start small and do a very good job of getting the weeds out and getting ground covers in, using mulch. And then as we refine our systems, we can then scale up. This is an orchard, diversified orchard with a windbreak. It's a very common agroforestry practice here, but what you see is a lot of grass, right? we all have grass growing like crazy. One of the challenges with having the grass, I call it light pollution. There's all this ground that if you look at a natural forest, it's not going to be just grass and a tree, right? When we do this, we create an array of challenges. Grasses are one of the worst or most antagonistic plants there are for just about every crop we can grow. They live in the roots of our plants, grow invasively, they rob the nutrients, they tend to create a bacterially dominated soil, which is not really ideal for a tree, which prefers a fungal dominated soil. In this picture, you'll notice right around the tree, it's extra green. That's because it was fertilized and the tree is getting some fertility, but the grass is robbing it. So we're creating a problem just by fertilizing it. It's, can be really troublesome. And then when the weed whacker breaks or the mower breaks or you take a vacation, the weeds start growing and they're all around your plants. I call it plant stress. This is a thing that is like kind of like my arch enemy. This is my mission in life, is to teach people how to avoid these situations, because I feel like it's a horrible relationship where we have to like always be tending, or else the crop is going to fail. Step away for a month, step away for 2 months, your crop has failed. You're overwhelmed. And that would be an example of an active system. If we have to maintain, it's like the gas pedal on a car. Luckily, it doesn't do it on its own, well, not yet at least, but we step on the gas and then it goes. When we step off or take our foot off the gas, it stops, right? We need to keep on doing that, except for, I guess, these automated things. But passive systems operate on their own without continual maintenance. And that's what we can work towards to really create a functioning, reliable, and productive system. When we go to finally weed whack, what happens? So often we hurt our trees. We weed whack them, we mow them, we bump up to them. And this damage invites pests and disease to then, hurt the plants we're trying to take care of. So yeah, there's a lot of other options. And to really like understand, well, what's the solution? What are we going to do? How are we going to get away from this grassy system? And I believe traditional ecological knowledge is vital for humanity to survive. It really is knowledge passed on from nature, from Teatua. There's many ways of looking at it, but it's the knowledge of how to live on Earth sustainably, and agroforestry is part of that. This picture was shared to me with Tahuna Nui Paliotu or Opalitu Ikaika Dombriguez, and you can check out his website. He's got information. He does, he's a kahuna la'au lapa'au, also teaches ho'oponopono and lomi lomi ha ha. He was telling me he was up in the mountain gathering. He goes and gathers wild herbs. And he found this ti'i or ki'i up in the forest. It was carved. And, that'd be kind of amazing to be out in the nature and then you see this. And he said, this is tane, also known as kane. Keeping an eye out, watching. And I feel like nature shows us what we can do. All the answers all around us, and like nature just wants to conspire to work with us. It's just that we got to figure out, we got to learn, we have to observe, or kilo, we got to like get pili with this. And when we do that, the power of the forest works for us, or as I like to say, we can let nature do the work. And there's quite a few people working on revitalizing all these traditions, and there's so many cultural practitioners, so it's a real privilege to be in Hawaii and to learn from so many uncles and aunties. I highly recommend it if any of you who are not familiar with these systems. Take some time and do your homework, and you'll have a great respect for it, and yeah, you'll understand the responsibility of taking care of the land here. A number of traditional Hawaiian agroforestry practices have been utilized in specific types of location. It wasn't all over the place. I don't have my notes here, but I'm pretty sure that the numbers that Natalie Kurashima, PhD, and others came up with for the level of production that was here before Captain Cook, it was approximately 6% of the land was producing enough for 1.2 million people, which is not that much less than what we have now. And nowadays we have way more land under cultivation and we're producing less. That tells me that these systems can be more productive, more sustainable, and yeah, just amazingly delicious ways to grow. A common method was kukui and kalo, grown in places where the soil is very acidic. Grow the kukui and then burn it all down. Hala, ferns, there's all kinds of things that have been grown to then create the right conditions for the kalo to grow. And puna, the ulu thrived, even though it was, much of it was rock or is rock. The ulu still just produces because it can get its roots down into the springs. Yeah, the puna, it can hit the water. It's also known for the ava and uala down there. Dr. Noah Lincoln of UH and also the Hawaii Ulu Cooperative, he's done a lot of work to which was, and still is, it's still there. It's extremely productive, can provide so much of the whole kingdom's food. And yeah, it's just a long-lived tree, pretty fun. Kohala, traditionally it was ko as in sugarcane, and uala, lots of uala because it's dry. So not exactly agroforest per se, but part of the reason is because it's very dry. But what Hawaiians figured out is that's one of the most fertile soils throughout the island. They found the sweet spot, and that's that traditional ecological knowledge. They found the sweet spot, developed systems, and then scaled up. Rock mulches as well as rock walls are part of that system, which you see there. Those rock walls offer passive irrigation through condensation, where they warm up at night and then cool down at nighttime and pull the water out of the air. Now it is grazing land, and much of Kohala Mountain is deforested, denuded. We've got like totally bare locations. It's heartbreaking to see what's happened to it. So hopefully we can get things together and revitalize that mountainside, get more native plants and also more food growing. An interesting thing about the Hawaiian food production systems is the lo'i, the wetland agriculture. It's kind of like, how would I put it? It's dependent on the forest above, and that's Wauakua, the sacred forest above. Up there, there's all kinds of nutrients that naturally comes down. And that's part of the reason to me why it's called Wauakua or Wauakua, is that the creator is just creating this abundance, and it just flows downhill from Mauka to Makai. And the lo'i harvests those nutrients. The forest feeds the lo'i. instead of people, although there was fertilization happening, such as harvesting kukui or hau or sugarcane or ferns, which could then be burned or just stamped right into the ground. We've got bananas on the edge here, so that's another, intercrop. An aspect of lo'i and just traditional culture that's very important that I feel like we're missing in this Western model, where it's like, you got the boss, you got the workers who usually don't get paid enough. They do the hardest work and they're not really appreciated. We got the flip side of, within a traditional culture and many cultures, there's the power of working together hand in hand. We get so much done, in 2 hours, work's done. We got the rest of the day to go swimming or do whatever. There's a lot of benefits, the resources are shared more equitably. And here in Hawaii, what I found is you get a level of nourishment that you can't get doing anything else. I call it vitamin H, vitamin Hawaiian, because we go home feeling full. And part of that feeling is it's all about connecting to a place, but also the people there. And you can check out Pohaha Ikalani. They're down in Waipio Valley, and they host groups to do all this kind of stuff. If we go down the river further, now we've got our local i'a. That's the fish pond in the brackish water. What you see there on the top left is one of the longest, I believe the longest fish pond rock wall in Hawaii. And you see in the middle, there's a channel which allows the fish to come in, the little baby fish, but it keeps the big ones from getting out because it's, I forget what it's called, makaha? No. If anybody knows that, what's the name of the term for the gate? It's basically a gate where the big fish can't get out, but the little ones can swim in. The runoff, makaha, mahalo. The runoff from the agricultural systems feeds the algae and the limu in these ponds, which then feeds the fish, and the ponds become a nursery for the ocean. So now we're doing farming and with the forest and like fields and the ocean. And I think that's part of the reason why Hawaiians took this to the highest level. Very productive, enhancing the nature rather than hurting it. And you can check out Hui Kaloko Honoko Hau. They offer community work days. Loke Aloha does a lot of the work, and others. And yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to go and help that out. Below we have Haleolono and Keokaha. That's part of Edith Kanakaole Foundation. Websites there. They also offer community work days, and yeah, it's pretty special to go and help out there. Okay, this is something I'm kind of excited to share. I haven't shared this at all in any of my classes over the years. This is something I learned about when I lived in Washington State before I came here in 2011. And I have a background of gathering. Like when I was a kid, I loved to gather berries. I loved picking flowers for my mom. Really got into gathering. And then over time, I really got into gathering and eventually became like a recognized expert in wild, edible, and medicinal plants of the Pacific Northwest. And when I was learning permaculture at the same time, I started looking into all these anthropological accounts of the earliest known cultures and the plants and their relation his domestication, they saw this, wild forest. And as it turns out, the Coast Salish nations, which are in the Pacific Northwest and what is, called Oregon, California, or Oregon, Washington, British Columbia nowadays. It's a beautiful, beautiful history of gardening on a grand scale with native plants that they had available to them, and using nature's processes of fire, burning, to keep it living. In this bottom right photograph, you see the Gary oak, which is a remnant of an ancient ecosystem that would have been displaced by Douglas fir and other trees which have invaded. In California, the native people traditionally call it devilweed. Now it's known as a native tree. So as the ecosystem cooled, that Gary oak was under pressure. It was getting invaded by those trees. The flowers that you see in the front, that's camas. That's a very important root crop. That's like a type of carbohydrate that, how can I put it? Mothers would pass the camas plots down to their daughters. So it was a matrilineal system of agriculture where they did the agriculture and would harvest this. Their process of harvesting would also sow. And there's also other plants that are endangered species that are remnants from the ancient ecosystem that they were growing for food. And now it's very important for people who live there to grow them, because if they don't, they're going to disappear, and we're going to lose more options. There's tons of berries there, as well as fish, we know, right? They think like, oh yeah, they were just fishing. So that's how they did so well. As it turns out, traditionally they did weirs. It's W-E-I-R-S. And so a weir is more or less a dam, kind of like a fish pond, where there's a narrow gate where the salmon could go up through to spawn. The smaller ones were harvested. The larger ones were allowed to go up and breed because they hold more eggs. And it's also, in a way, a breeding program. So I call it wild animal husbandry. They had all kinds of ways of increasing the production of ducks, deer, elk, and salmon. And as such, that's why they were the mystery for a long time, because they have a high culture with specialized jobs and also high art, yet their agriculture was not realized. And so that's why I think, we have a lot to learn from so many of these traditional cultures, and, support them in their goals of revitalizing these systems. Okay. And go through a few of these traditional models, and then we'll be opening it up to questions in a bit. This photograph was taken in the Amazon of an uncontacted tribe, meaning they've never had contact with Western or anyone else besides, their people, or, their neighbors per se. This photograph was taken to document them so that they don't get wiped out. It's how can I put it? There's loggers and ranchers and miners who are decimating the Amazon. And if they know that there's one of these tribes there, they'll go in and kill them. They'll hunt them down. So this was to document them being there and then protect that land so that they can survive. What I think is amazing is that the most recent understanding of these Amazonian tribes, we think of them as hunter-gatherers in the Amazon. Evidence is showing that they lived in large cities, which are buried in the jungle. That's the El Dorado type of thing. And the theory now is that they left the city and created these food forests, and for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons might be that in the urban centralized agricultural societies, there tends to be a lot more hierarchy and less equity, versus going out in these systems, shifting the makeup of the forest towards something that's useful and productive and meets the needs of nature. Sounds good to me. There's papayas in here. They also grow bananas, cassava, and then they use succession. Or sequential agroforestry, where it goes from the short-lived plants to the mid-term plants to the long-term plants to the trees. It turns into a jungle, a food jungle. And it's all more or less planted at once. And since I'm talking about traditional models, I would love to share something I haven't really seen here: the traditional Irish hedgerows. I have Irish descent, and it's been interesting being here in Hawaii. It kind of really encouraged me to learn more about the traditions of my ancestors. These hedgerows offer a multitude of benefits. Provide erosion control, habitat for wildlife. They're a living fence to keep animals contained and provide a multitude of other benefits. In this picture, you can kind of see what this is called laying the hedge, where there are trees that are planted, and then after they reach a certain age, they're cut considerably to the point where they can fall over, but there's still bark on the underside. There's still bark and some wood, so it's not going to kill the tree. Where it's cut, it's going to send new branches up, and then they're woven in. That's a vine at the top. So it turns into a living barrier, privacy barrier, keeps the animals in. And this was developed before there was barbed wire. This is a traditional fencing system that would be really neat to see here in Hawaii. Kerala, India is home to one of the largest populations on Earth. They have one of the largest population densities on Earth. They have the number 2, or had the number 2 Asia quality of living. They're very long lived. They have gender equality. 90% of the people own land on $400 a year. This was in 1990, these stats. And they do it all with food forests, forest gardens, multi-story agroforestry systems. Pretty amazing place. If you contrast that with Mumbai, India, one of the other most densely populated places on Earth, where they do agriculture and have a lot of urbanization, we see extreme disparity in resources, where you have the rich and then you have the ultra poor living in just hovels and struggling, poor health, short lives. Really problematic. And frankly, this is where we're heading right now. We look around and we see so many poor people, so many homeless people, the mental health issues that come from being isolated. So I would love to see it so that we're not continuing down this track, and we overgrow these third world ghettos that are popping up all over the place with agroforestry. In my future talks, I'm going to be giving more information about this, the nuts and bolts, and like how to really make it happen. But what it all boils down to is agroecology, the application of ecological concepts and principles in farming. What you see here is ecological succession. It's a process where when nature is disturbed and the soil is made bare, even if a lava flow happens, it's just a rock, nature is going to conspire to turn it into a forest or a diverse prairie. If we understand the process, learn it, then we can develop agricultural systems that mimic it. It's a type of biomimicry. As you see here, we've got a cover crop. That yellow flower is sun hemp. Below, there's daikon radish, buckwheat, and oats. And then a ground cover of perennial peanut, which is planted there, as well as pigeon pea and kalo, all in that row. Also comfrey and papaya. So yeah, a lot of diversity. Ideally, you have like 7 of the main crops, and then your cover crop can be more diverse. You have it spaced out well, reliably, so when the cover crop grows or the weeds grow, you know where they're going to be because there's a uniform nature to this planting. And it's almost like a tattoo. I think about these Polynesian tattoos with the triangles and all that. And that's what I do is I plant my tree, my long-term trees, and then the shrubs between that, it's all uniform. And then the kalo between that. And so it turns into lots of triangles, and it's all, instead of basing it on a line, you know where each plant is based on your primary plants. This process is not very common. It's really prone to being overrun with weeds if you don't use mulch and do a good job of just getting it established. So I caution you, be very careful with this, but what you get, it's like nature, it's where like people think it's a jungle, and they tell me, I don't think you know what you're doing, but this ava was producing like massive corms, and it took barely any work. So yeah, if you get a chance, check out agroecology. And it's just, there's a lot of different terms for all, intercropping, polyculture, agroforestry, permaculture. But agroecology kind of sums it up. It's just working with nature. And you can let nature do the work by aiming. This is the goal for those of you who are farming and gardening. Many of you are, stuck in the routine of practices that I say forestall failure. So weed whacking, weeding, what's that doing? We're just fighting the processes. Nature just wants to grow, and we're saying, no, we want this one crop. We have a narrow-minded perspective. It's a Western thing. Like, we want this one thing, to hell with everything else. And what we do is we're doing the work of Akua. We're doing the work of nature, taking away jobs. So all these other things like mowing, weed whacking, herbicide, fertilization, pest control, those are ecosystem services that need to be filled. To do that, you shift towards practices that improve growing conditions. And really, it's challenging when you've planted a system based on the Western model of just one plant. You've got all these different things. So there's quite a few challenges of doing it. It's totally possible. You just got to zap the weeds. You got to kill them. I do it all organically. You can even overgrow the weeds. JB Friday, Dr. JB Friday at UH, he's an agroforestry extension agent. And he told me that the Marshallese plant hau, it's a native plant. They plant hau in like pasture or guinea grass, come back 5 years later, and you can either burn it down or cut it down. And the grass is all gone. And then you have an amazing deep, dark soil. So that's one way, but I prefer to get the weeds out, plant intensively, make sure there's no weeds, using mulch, multi-species, ground covers, support species like pigeon pea. When I say support, I mean they provide ecological services, or they also provide physical support if plants need it. They also provide chop and drop mulch. do biotilling, biofertilizing, and then we can fill in with native plants and surround it with weed barriers, which are things like comfrey or lemongrass, planted on about a shaka spacing in a line around our plantings, or even bananas. You know, you do a row of bananas, that stops just about everything. That's how we can shift to systems that are working with nature. And you see this picture here, those are microbes along the roots of this turnip that I grew in what was a dirt road. I planted out an agroforest, and this is what happened. The soil turned amazingly dark, airy, very deep soil. And then the plants were thriving. And these microbes, which I'm not really getting into tonight, but I will in the future, the microbes are a huge part of farming sustainably. If we're not farming with an awareness of microbes, which the Western style does not, all that mowing, all this other stuff, it really hurts them versus these other systems that I'm referring to. They create systems where you just see the microbes thriving. Okay, so we have upcoming classes. There'll be a second part to this class, this series, on July 12th. It'll have a lot more in-depth information about agroforestry practices. So this was just an overview, and then this next time it'll be a lot more about like how-to examples, things to consider. And then this is a 3-year project. So next year and the year after, I'll be teaching additional classes. And they'll be covering intro to intercropping. So that's the ins and outs of working with different plants, and I'll share lots of examples of plants that work well together. And then agroforestry design, which is the process of looking at land, assessing it, and designing a successful agroforest. And then lastly, we have our soil health workshop coming up this coming weekend at Maona Gardens. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up there. It's a good time for questions, answers, discussion, and then also there's a poll or survey. If folks can fill that out, it really helps us to, number one, to, we provide these services for free, and we need to share this with you so that we can get the information back to our funders to, this is how they make sure that, we're doing anything. But also what it does is helps us know what we can do better and what you would like to learn about in the future. And we have lots and lots of great educators in aquaculture, land management, and agriculture. So yeah, keep your eyes posted. If you fill out the poll, then you'll be getting notice in the future. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up right there. Fire away.
Hey, mahalo, Dave. That was amazing. You shared so much information with us. So we do have one question so far in the chat. What plant or tree would you suggest for a living hedge in Hawaii?
Where? Hawaii?
Hawaii, here in Hawaii.
Oh, Hawaii. Oh boy. Well, it all depends. It all depends. Is it really dry or is it wet? Is it acidic? Can you have taller trees, or do you need it to be shorter? And that's the key to all this is finding out like what the site variables are, and then going from there. Living hedge, one edible one that I can think of offhand that's lower growing, great for small landscapes, is the Suriname cherry. It provides these like kind of like resinous. Some people don't like it, but I'm a big fan of it. But yeah, and it doesn't need fertilizer. Like you can grow this thing in just about anything, and it produces, forms a thick evergreen hedge. A common one people use is podocarpus. That's an evergreen tree. It gets huge if you don't cut it. So that's one thing you got to think about for that one. You need to maintain it or else it's going to turn into a giant tree. Bananas, they make a great one. And lastly, hedge panax, Panax, is it gets like 20 feet tall and it's got a vertical form. It's like whoop, just goes straight up, not a lot of branches. So you can plant those really close and it turns into a great privacy barrier and living fence where people are not going to walk through it or want to walk through it. Or also cactuses. Cactuses are another good one for keeping people out. Anyone else? Feel free to ask questions about your gardens or if you've got experience with agroforestry, any challenges you've had or successes. It's always great to hear. Okay. Okay, I'm going to scroll through the comments from the bottom. Okay, I see the Google Drive. Yeah, so just check in with that. Check out the documents.
We have a comment, so much understory, how to mulch better.
So I'm not quite sure what is meant by that. When you have understory, it can be tough to spread the mulch if you have lots of different plants. So that's where having a ground cover growing with your understory crops makes a big difference because it becomes a living mulch. If there's any weeds, that's the thing, is if there's any weeds growing between our plants and we throw mulch down, we're feeding the weeds. Not good. So yeah, I say don't feed the weeds, get the weeds out, get your ground covers in, spread your mulch, which can be like, we've got the dump mulch as we call it here. Oh, yeah. Got a kitty fight over here now. And also chop and drop. That's one of the things where if you're taking banana leaves or branches, if you just throw a bunch of branches on the ground, somebody must have done it here. It's going to become a weedy mess where the weeds are going to come through. It's a nightmare to try to maintain. So what I do is I design about a row of trees and shrubs with herbaceous perennials between, and then another row of taro about 2 feet, 18 inches or 2 feet out on both sides. And then that gap of 18 inches or 2 feet, I then use that for the chop and drop area where I have my ground cover in there. But then as I chop and drop, I lay it in a line where I trim the branches so they're all straight sticks instead of like long, brushy, twiggy branches. And then it becomes stick mulch where the weeds get smothered and even the ground cover gets smothered, which then releases more fertility. And one little side note, when you add chop and drop mulch into your landscape, from your landscape, what it does is it's adding more carbon to your soil. And as Dr. Noah Lincoln shared with me a while back, when you add more carbon to your soil, it's like you're increasing your nutrient pipeline. So if it's a pipe and you have very little carbon, you can't get too many nutrients. It's not going to hold too much. But if you increase your carbon, you can increase your pipeline size. So chopping and dropping is going to increase the amount that you can hold. You're going to have more productivity and trap more nutrients. Okay, anybody else?
We've got a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to go back a little bit.
Okay.
First one is Chaya as a hedge barrier.
Chaya is a great edible hedge. It's kind of floppy. It's a great windbreak though. It can handle severe wind and drought, high nutrition, but it's a little bit scraggly and it really needs to have something growing with it, or else the weeds are going to grow below it. So I would grow kalo, pigeon pea, perennial peanut. I'm a huge fan of perennial peanut, or sisu spinach is another edible green. But for home gardens, it does host slugs though. But yeah, chaya, it can be a great one. Okay. Anyone
Okay.
else?
Let's see. How do you take dump mulch and manage it better?
Okay. Number one is cover it with a tarp, and or more important, make sure you don't have guinea grass or other weeds dropping their seeds onto the mulch, because if you're doing that, you're just introducing the weeds into your garden. So very important that it remains weed free, because I did heat treat it, so there should be no seeds that will germinate. Trees, I found that trees, if it's fresh mulch, trees can handle hot compost. Vegetables, not so much, but if it's like a hot compost, then in a way it's kind of good to like smother weeds if you have enough of it. Otherwise, it's good to let the mulch cool down a little bit and then apply it relatively thick, so that you don't have any weeds coming through. If you have uniform application, that's a big one. If you have like bare spots, it's not uniform, like the thickness, it's a nightmare, because the weeds are going to start growing and it's going to be way more work. And you can also inoculate it. You can use microbes, put them in water with fertility, and then dump that on your mulch. And then that's a way to, get more life into your soil. And speaking of mulch, I see something about coconut mulch, chopped leaves and shredded coconut. Yes. The coconut, I quarter the coconuts so that they're not going to hold water, and also turn them so that the hollow part is pointing down, because otherwise we're just going to collect water. They are amazing for the soil, but they can also create habitat for all kinds of things like mice, rats, and slugs. But they live and grow and die, so they're like micro livestock who are going to improve the soil. And the leaves as well. I also remove the leaflets and then the stalks. So it's like the leaflets all go down, and then I have the leaf stalks on top. Or I just have a ton of leaves and throw it all. But I never, ever, ever throw it on top of weeds, because the weeds will come through, and then you got a challenge there. And here's a comment about the husks. Yeah, if you shred them, shred the husks, that's great, but it's not necessary.
I also have a question for best practices maintaining paths without weed whacking.
Okay, that's a challenge, right? Because when we have a path, we have a gap in the vegetation, and if it's dirt, the weeds are going to grow. Even if it's rocks, gravel, the weeds still come in. So I'm a fan of ground covers. Excuse me. Perennial peanut, once again, is an excellent ground cover that you can, as long as you don't mow it too low, the weeds, it does a great job of controlling weeds. You can walk across it. It's soft on the feet. It just can't handle tons and tons of people walking on it. So it's not for like, if you're having a party, everyone's all in one spot. And especially if it's really wet, it'll actually die back and then new leaves will come. But yeah, that is a challenge. What I found, it's just perennial peanut. I just do that and then mow it occasionally. And that just, I can walk around and I have no weeds in my landscape.
Mahalo. And then we've got a bunch more questions now. So the next one is, any advice for Kikuyu grass control?
Oh yeah, Kikuyu. Okay, Kikuyu is a very important forage. It's a grazing grass for cows and other animals. It's adapted to, and this is important for all this stuff. It's when you learn about these plants, don't just learn about like what they produce and what you need to grow them. Look at where they're from, the historic plant communities that they evolved with. That's like one of the biggest parts of agroforestry, is that when you learn what these plants are adapted to, you can grow relatives, edible relatives and medicinal relatives of those plant community members. So the kikuyu grass is adapted to getting trampled by animals, and as such, it sends runners across the ground and also rhizomes through the ground and then comes up. So it benefits, it's adapted to being eaten. So it's a aggressive plant that for us doing agroforestry or any kind of like vegetable farming, it's a nightmare. It's horrible. And if you planted in it, you have the rhizomes growing in your trees and shrubs or whatever you have. So if that's the case, what I do is cut the vegetation as low as possible. And then on a small scale, you could do the sheet mulch, which is cardboard laid like shingles, where it's multiple layers in every spot so that the grass can't get through. And weed mat, the woven weed mat, the plastic fiber weed mat works very well as well, where it'll suppress the growth to the point where it'll die because it can't get the sunlight that it needs. Other than that, one possibility would be planting cassava. I've done this with wainaku. Cassava and bananas, they overgrow the wainaku, and maybe they'll do the same thing with the kikuyu, where they get shaded out so much. And then when you dig up the cassava, you can pull out those kikuyu grasses.
Okay, next question is, what crops go well together on the west side of Waimea?
West side, the wet side of Waimea. Well, you think about the flowering cherries, right? They've got lots of flowering cherries, and there's a lot of different stone fruits like cherries, peaches, nectarines. They actually thrive in those conditions. They need cooler weather. Versus bananas, they take a long time to produce up there. So you don't want to think about like the tropical plants, but more like the Mediterranean plants. That's really what does well there. Mamaki also, there are a number of native plants that thrive up there. Figs, persimmons, pomegranates. There's what's it? Cherimoya. It's delicious. If you ever get your hands on cherimoya, there's all kinds of great things. And if anybody is interested in learning about the many plants that we have, there's a great book which I will type in here right now, called Permaculture. It was written by an author who is on the island. It was a D. Hunter Byer and Dr. Franklin Martin. And it goes through 300 edible plants, all the uses, where they grow, the native plants, how to grow them all, the challenges, and then lastly, the weeds, all the things we probably shouldn't grow, but just so you know, it gives the information about like, the uses. So yeah, Permaculture, and it's available at basically books.
That's an amazing resource. Mahalo for that.
Yeah.
I have the next question. Are you using inoculates to improve decomposting chop and drop?
Not for the chop and drop. I mean, okay, I'm going to give one of my secrets away here. I inoculate my potted plants, my trees and shrubs, anything in a pot. What I'll do is I will create a solution that has a mixture of biochar, which is a carbon source like wood that's heated in a low oxygen environment, which then drives out the wood gas and the carbon remains. So things like bamboo with properly made biochar will look like the bamboo after you go through the whole process. It's black, looks like the bamboo, but it sounds like glass. That carbon is home to, or provides a home. It's like high occupancy housing for microbes because it has a lot of surface area. You create that surface area and the carbon source, which is food. You then smash it up, make it all small, add that to water along with, or even better is you have that and then make the solution and pour it on the biochar. You add, I add 3 times the strength of a typical fertilizer. You could do like a fish fertilizer. For myself, I use urine. Sounds crazy, but urine is 60 parts nitrogen versus, triple 16 fertilizer, that's 16 parts nitrogen. So urine is a super fertilizer, which, is detrimental to the landscape. We got to put to use. So I will use even urine, but a complete fertilizer. Then I add triple strength of an inoculant. So that would be Korean natural farming IMO number 2 is what I do. And for anyone who's not familiar with Korean natural farming, I highly recommend you check out the many resources. It's a way of biofertilizing. And I do kalo IMOs with the kalo skins after you cook it and peel it. Just use those instead of rice to collect your microbes, add brown sugar, and that's IMO 2. So I do that, give it the full fertilizer mix, pour it on the biochar, and then strain the biochar for my planting holes. And then I soak my plants in there for like half an hour or so. And my plants go off. There's very little, if any, transplant shock that is kind of common with planting here. And then those microbes, this is my theory, I know microbes do this, but basically the microbes live along the roots of plants. They are fed plant sugars. In exchange, those microbes will then liberate the nutrients from the soil, the chop and drop, from whatever they can. They can even translocate nutrients, moving from one place to another, as has been found in a forest. So if you do that, it's a great way to inoculate once, and then your activities will then feed them, as well as just the process of it becoming an agroforest. It becomes like a perpetual energy machine, constantly feeding itself.
This is amazing, EK, you're sharing. I've got a question about tools. Favorite tools for overhauling a landscape?
Oh man, I had a feeling that might come up. The hand sickle. It's a serrated hand sickle. I got the longer one. The plastic handle one seems to last longer. The wooden handle one tends to break. Make sure you paint it. It's really easy to lose in the landscape. Make it a bright color. But yeah, hand sickles are good to get in close and work on the detail. Getting close to your trees without like weed whacking up to them and hurting them. So that's my favorite for clearing, or even, maybe like weed whack everything, but staying away from the trees, and then do that. One last one is the pickaxe. Pickaxe is great for getting grasses out of the ground where you can't bring in a machine. And I get all those weeds out. That's the key. So I hope that helps.
I can say I love my sickle too.
Yeah, right.
We've got a question about comfrey as an edge to avoid weed whacking.
Yeah. In my future classes, I'll be showing examples of weed barriers, and it works great for the lower growing grasses like the hilo grass, the carpet grass. The plants like the elephant grass, so that stuff is like, it gets so huge and it's not going to work unless you're weed whacking on the other edge. And what I found is the edges are usually the most work for me, is keeping the neighbor's nightmare messes from invading. I can create a stable ecosystem inside, but nature just wants to invade because they're not doing anything. So comfrey planted about a shaka apart in a row. Ideally, you can plant it with things like daikon, buckwheat, oats, and sun hemp, as well as pigeon pea. And then you have this great diversity of plants that are going to grow in the short term, provide a crop, while the comfrey gets established. And if you don't, the key to it all is have it be weed free, mulch it well. And even I go 3 feet beyond the comfrey to make sure there's no weeds there. So nothing is running in, no weeds are allowed to come in. And then once the comfrey gets established, then the weeds can come in. And as long as you mow up to the edge of it occasionally, like it works great.
Okay, so we are over time. I do have 3 more questions in our chat. So we're gonna go ahead and answer those last questions. Is there a best way to begin managing preparing a large chunk of raw land that is overgrown with guinea grass and small invasive trees, albizia, autograph tree, African tulip, etc., without bulldozing or mowing?
Okay, so that's a common thing. There's a lot of people who want to do this and they're working with land and like trying to figure out how to do this. And the key is really learning the land. That's, ideally it's generations of experience, but many of us don't have that. So observing, number one, go out there at different times of the day, check out the neighbors, see what they've done. And then start small. Don't try to do it all at once, because it costs a ton of money, takes choke effort, all the weed whacking, all the mowing just to keep it going. And that's the way many people's farms and farmsteads are, where they got all excited. They want to plant their trees because they take the longest, and it's a lifetime of work for decreasing production. So start small. And for you, perhaps if it's the right situation, would be the animal tractor system. So grazing, fencing it. You can even like put in pens. Like what I've done with somebody was we used the fence panels, 16-foot hard wire fence panels, created a square and ran pigs, which then uprooted the wainaku and other grasses. And then after we had them run there long enough, you run chickens, they get the seeds, pull any last weeds, and then you plant. So you're doing small clearings and have an overall design beforehand so that you know what you're doing as you're clearing. That's a great way, because the animals improve the soil. They naturally want to eat the weeds, and you don't have to pay them at all. So I think that's probably your best bet. And then otherwise, if that's not an option, cutting the trees, getting them very low, as low as you can, and then weed whack, and then do the woven weed mat, because that kills the guinea grass and a lot of other plants here. You might need to dig out those invasive trees, or even do drill holes in them and put salt, like the Hawaiian salt or whatever salt, not pa'akai, but the stuff they sell is Hawaiian salt, and cover that with a tarp if you need to, but that'll kill many of those plants. And then after you got your clear space, peel one strip of that weed mat back, make sure nothing's going to grow back, and then you can do small scale plantings and then scale up from there after you get successes.
Okay, next one is any advice for fireweed control? Good question.
Fireweed. Yes. Yep. I learned this from an old Portuguese farmer who he's been raising cows. They've been raising cows for generations. And what he said was he does a great job. He does this rotational grazing. It's like a cell or paddock system where he grazes them enough to grazes the grasses to the point where like he doesn't want it to get too low. If you leave the animals in there too long, you're going to have bare soil, and you're also going to be destroying the organic matter, but also just the shade. There's something about having like a guinea grass clump that's like, I think he takes it down to the most I see is like 2 feet. He leaves at least 2 feet remaining versus hitting it really hard or cutting the grasses and trying to get that, only that low growth. So if you have animals, that's kind of important. You want to make sure you rotate your animals. If you have it, pulling it is the only way I know, but just realize that every time you pull a weed, you're sowing 10 more because there's a soil seed bank. There's all kinds of seeds in the soil. Maybe a native plant will pop up, but probably fireweed. So if you do the multiple weedings, maintain your pasture high, and then otherwise, if you're trying to do agroforest, just get your plantings established, mulch it, do your polyculture, and then the fireweed just doesn't want to grow in those conditions because it's adapted to like full sun.
All right. And then the last question is hialoa or uhaloa. I know it's a medicinal plant. What type of plant is it? Does it help the soil in any way?
Okay, uhaloa. That is a native plant that is used in certain ways for, I believe, sore throats. And it's often, I've seen it very often, like very dry, arid, nutrient deficient soils, low organic matter soils. So like Hawai'i area. I don't know what it does for the soil. I would, it is kind of tap rooted, I believe. So probably breaks up the compaction, and any native plant is going to build the soil resources. But I couldn't say in particular like what exactly that's going to do. If you have it, I'd say grow it, but just be warned. It makes a lot of seeds, and in certain conditions can become like, it's strange to say it, but like a weed where it'll just, dominate and keep on popping up. So it's all about having the right relationship with it, the right plant for the right place.
Okay, mahalo Pia for all of this mana'o you shared tonight. This was quite an amazing presentation. I'm hoping everyone else got quite a bit of information out of this too. I know we went a little bit long, so mahalo for everybody who did stick with us. We are so grateful for you joining us tonight. Please make sure you save on your calendars. Our next workshop with Dave is going to be July 12th. It'll be the same link, same time. You can always find that information on the hfuu.org website. It's on the main page, and the link is going to be in the chat as well. It'll be pretty easy to find. So if you ever need to get to that link, it'll be there for you. Sorry, let me just double check the spelling on there, which I still keep getting wrong. Apologies. Okay. So everybody who finished up our poll, we appreciate that. We'll be sending out the invitations directly as well, and then keep a lookout on social media. I'm sure a lot of you have seen a lot of this information as well. But mahalo everybody for joining us, and mahalo nui Dave.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been great. I appreciate everybody coming out and everybody's help who made this happen. So look forward to the next round.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Aloha.
Aloha. Ahui ho.